Hi, everybody. We've got everyone on the call now, so let's get started. My name is Trevor McTaggart, and I'm the Vice President of Partner Success for Strongpoint. I've been with Strongpoint since last year, and our head office is based in Toronto, Ontario. My contact information is there below, and as I mentioned, we will be sending out a copy of this recording to anyone who's interested in reaching out. Just some housekeeping notes. During the webinar, please feel free to ask questions in the GoToWebinar chat, and we will be reviewing those during the session and answering questions either mid-session or at the end, whichever makes the most sense. We do expect the webinar to be about 30 to 40 minutes, depending on your questions. And with that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Strongpoint before I pass control over to Techfino. So Strongpoint is an automated documentation and change management system. We are built for Oracle, NetSuite. So we deploy as a bundle within the NetSuite environment, and we were voted Partner of the Year by NetSuite in 2015. We do have a Salesforce solution as well, so anyone who's looking at change management and their Salesforce solution can reach out to us. We have over 400 installations of our software, so you know that it's tried and true. We've got a lot of people using it every day, and they're letting us know the things they love about it and giving us great suggestions on how we can improve the software. We've automatically documented over 10 million customizations in a NetSuite account and figured out that there's over 80 million dependencies in between them. And that's sort of the key fact that we want to pass on is it's not just knowing what's in your system, but it's knowing if I change something, what you may break because it's related. We figured that we've saved about 13,000 person years of documentation and about over $3 billion in time savings for their customers. And Victor's going to go through why he agrees with that estimate. We were formerly known as FlowDocs. Strongpoint is just a name change. All of our company executive and the company org structure has stayed the same. We just looked at an opportunity to rebrand ourselves for a couple different reasons. We do have a blog post as well that goes through that if you have any additional questions. So with that, I'm going to pass the control over to Victor from Techfino.
Company in 2014 with one of my business partners, Brian Willman. However, I have been working on the NetSuite platform since around 2009, as soon as I graduated from university. So a little bit of background, what about Techfino? So our business is essentially a boutique NetSuite consultancy firm. NetSuite is pretty much all we do. We are a NetSuite SDN partner. We are a solution partner. We are enabled with suite success and the various modules that require enablement, and we are soon to be Suite Commerce partners, Suite Commerce Advanced partners as well. We have business and accounting expertise to help companies best implement NetSuite and avoid many of the common pitfalls with ERP implementations and NetSuite implementation failures in particular. We have experience helping rescue failed implementation from other partners, and some of our senior leaders on our team are ex-NetSuite consultants that bring a lot of the larger implementation and experience and best practices to our project. What are some of the clients we serve? We range from companies in the 5 million to 1 billion average annual revenue. Our sweet spot is wholesale distribution, retail, non-for-profit, and professional services. We have about 20 years of combined NetSuite implementation experience and also 80 plus successful implementations under our belts. From a technical perspective, we have an extremely talented technical team who have delivered over 130 successful customization, integration, and automation projects, all US-based, and we strongly believe that a high level of quality in this area is important to be able to deliver a NetSuite solution that is robust and basically follows best practices. We also strive to be innovative. We are currently developing our flagship product called Clean Sweep Archive and Purge, which really its intention is to archive historical transactions, files, and records with the intention of reducing your overall fees that NetSuite imposes and optimizing and improving your search and NetSuite capabilities. So let's talk a bit about my career progression. So I started with NetSuite, as I mentioned earlier, in February of 2009, right after I got my bachelor's of computer engineering. And back then, cloud was somewhat still in its infancy. The adoption of solutions such as NetSuite and Salesforce was only starting to pick up at that moment. This meant that during the first few years of my career working with the product, I was mostly servicing clients that were smaller, clients that were more budget focused, were easily intimidated by the word customization, by the word scripting, by the word integration. So there's less complexity when it came to that. A common occurrence was that the implementation itself was performed in production, directly in production. So there was one environment, a smaller team, less complex. And over time, NetSuite, as NetSuite started to invest more into the product itself, and as the NetSuite One World product offering came out, we started to see that the larger clients started to consider NetSuite as a viable option during their software selection process. What did this progression change? Well, over time, we saw larger teams, larger implementation teams, more environments. When I say more environments, I mean actually dedicated sandbox development, quality assurance, user acceptance environments. There was more complex business processes noticed, which means more customizations, more changes, more automations, and more integrations. So in 2013, as a result of this progression, I led my first enterprise implementation for one of the top public retail companies out there. At that time, no one on our team or even at NetSuite had much experience dealing with a company of such a caliber, especially when it came to having to deal with SOX compliance and the importance imposed on strong environment control, improve the documentation, standard processes, and audit compliance. We were watched. Every single mistake we did was scrutinized, because making mistakes with such a big company meant that they could potentially fail an audit and potentially be penalized themselves for having or not complying by the imposed process. So our team had to quickly adapt. And what did this mean is we had to quickly figure out and roll out a very manual and time-consuming change management process. This process is really manual at the time, so a lot of time was spent controlling the environments. So what did we have to do? What did this change management process consist of? So we had to create restricted roles that were only capable of performing specific IT activities. For example, a role that only had access to deploy configurations, a role that only had access to script deployments. And usually these roles had only query access to data. So did not have query access to data. So it was really just meant to deploy configuration changes. And the purpose of this is so that the roles did not accidentally view data such as financial data or made changes in an environment they were not supposed to make changes. We had restricted environment access control. What this meant that no administrator access whatsoever in the environment. We had to capture all changes made in each environment. And this was done in multiple spreadsheets. So I'll give you guys an example in a second of this. But basically what it was is a spreadsheet like this, which was meant to capture every single configuration change in the environment when it came to lists, custom records, subtabs, custom forms, permissions, roles, reports, and safe searches. So you could see how time-consuming this could be. And the reason why this was done is so that as we progressed through the implementation, when we moved from development to QA, the most current environment became that gold standard. And the purpose of this tracker was meant to capture what are the current configurations that have been signed off, and what is the final gold standard of our environment. And finally, we had to also incorporate a script file versioning system, and also leverage a change request form. So every time we had to move configurations between the environments, meaning every time we had to do a certain deployment, we had to leverage and document these changes or whatever was being deployed in the other environment using a change request form, which is also manual. So any fields, any scripts that had to be bundled or moved to another environment required a change request form. And as a result of the change request form, the environment document that captured the environment was then updated by the specific team that was responsible for the environment. So let's stop there and ask ourselves this question: how much time was spent by each team member to enforce this process? Whether it was the development team, whether it was the quality assurance team, whether it was the UAT team, hundreds of hours was spent and hundreds of thousands of dollars was spent just to maintain this change management process. So everything from capturing the changes to creating the change request to moving and deploying to debugging was very inefficient. How efficient was this change? Very inefficient. However, it did reduce risk when it came to an implementation. It reduced risk and the team had more confidence because at least there was a gold standard, again, gold environment. So what did I learn from this whole experience, and what did I learn from this implementation I did in 2013? Well, one of the most important is that humans make a lot of mistakes. If there is a process that has to be handled, especially a detailed process, mistakes will be made along the way. Humans also take the path of least resistance. So what that means is that if there's a high complexity to a given process, what that means is that there is typically a lower adoption, a lower success of adoption or adopting the process. Next, implementations are very expensive, very stressful, and never easy. I know that one of my clients back in the day on one of my implementations said, "How could you do this every day?" And basically joked around saying that he needs a serious vacation after the implementation is done. Known change management and environment control, in my opinion, is the wild, wild west. It never works. The bigger the team, the more environments, the harder, the more complexity there is, and there has to be a process ingrained. And finally, what else did I learn? Automation is always better than a manual business process. And so as a result of this, even though we've implemented a manual change request process that was time consuming, it was not perfect. And over time, we were striving to look for a better solution with respect to implementations. So in 2014 was the year that I founded Techfino, and we basically took all the knowledge that we acquired on these enterprise implementations or bigger implementations, and we created our own methodology. And keep in mind, this was not perfect either, because it still had a lot of manual components to it. But what was the biggest differentiator is that we focused and we made this methodology to be a little bit more iterative. Customers that are using a new system will give you the requirements, however, will only realize that that's what they need once they start using the system and start adopting the system a little bit more. Bigger focus was spent on design and documentation, which in turn led to better scope control. I'm a big advocate of documenting the solution and also use cases, and really that's where we create functional design documents with defined solutions and associated use cases, which is then leveraged to validate that the solution was done correctly. We've defined the change management and issue management process, and also roles and responsibilities, which is very important when it comes to an implementation, in my opinion. So I'll focus a little bit about roles and responsibilities, and highlight the key roles on a typical implementation. One of the roles is the functional process lead and the technical architect. And so what are the responsibilities of such a role? Is basically they know the ins and outs of the application, they know the best practices, they gather the requirements, they do the solution design, and they document everything. But what's important with our methodology is that they know exactly which environment they're supposed to be in. So the functional process leads and the technical architects and the consultants and developers work in the development environment. That's their environment. They have control over the environment, and they are the ones that give access to whoever they need to give access to. Then there is the release manager. A release manager is a person that basically sits between each environment, works with the project manager, works with the whole team as a whole, and basically plans and approves change requests. And these change requests are typically from the development environment, come from the functional and technical resources. So they coordinate the release schedule based on the project plan that's set forth initially in the project. Then there's the quality assurance team. They create test cases based on requirements and solution design. They execute any regression testing and raise any defects. And finally, the more important part is they are responsible for the quality assurance environment. So anything with respect to when things need to be deployed, who gets access to what, is really controlled by that team. Now, I've seen in the past where there was teams, development teams and quality assurance teams that were one team, never really worked optimally. And finally, there's the subject matter experts and the business process experts. So who are these resources? These are the power users on the client side. They know the ins and outs of the business process. They know the pain points. They know the limitations and the workarounds. And typically, they're responsible for the UAT environment. So you could see that segregation of duties is a very important aspect with respect to our methodology and at least this process itself. So as a recap, defined environment owners is important here. Control of access is important here. And the coordination of deployment and changes is also important here on this implementation. Now, until now, everything with respect to change management and our methodology was handled manually. So we still had to update those spreadsheets. We still had to kind of, use external tools like issue management tools, and it was still a pretty cumbersome process. And we noticed it wasn't really adapted as well as we wanted to, especially when there was junior resources or junior or a bigger team. So basically what we did is we took our methodology, and as soon as the Strongpoint solution came out, we injected that into our project lifecycle. So you could see here on these slides, it's a typical project lifecycle where you have your planning, your development phase, which typically consists of your requirements and your design, your development, and then you progress into your quality assurance, which is really your testing phase, your user acceptance, which is basically your validation phase, and finally the production phase. And this is basically the deployment to production and the steady state after we go live. So everything you see highlighted in white is really what used to be covered manually, or used to be a manual business process that had to be enforced by the actual technical and functional teams or QA team, which was now streamlined and automated. So things like environment documentation and change capture, things like initiating change requests, things like creating issue defects and approving change requests. These are all the features that have now been automated as a result of Strongpoint, which greatly improved the process itself. On the QA side, you'll notice there is the review of there's certain reports that is leveraged to understand what changes happened in the environment. The resolution of non-compliant changes, raise of defects, and the communication of defects is all done with the tool. The approval of change requests, locking down configurations that have passed, locking customization and locking various process areas, and then initiating change requests to the other environments such as UAT is all done with the help of this tool. So what are some of the benefits we've seen by using Strongpoint? Well, the cumbersome process of now documenting in spreadsheets is gone. So the tool itself captures and allows us to capture all the real-time state of any environment. And if I go to my next slide, you'll notice here's an ERD, which is basically allows you to see all the dependencies and configurations within the environment. So you'll notice that there's all your fields, all your scripts, all your reports, all your forms. All of that is now captured in an automated fashion by the solution itself. So what does this allow us to do? How does this help us? Well, one of the more important things is that it allows us to understand the changes. It allows us to ask the what-if questions. What if I deploy this? What impact does it have? What if I make a change to this field? Is this a small risk or a big risk? It also allows us to monitor and optimize certain customizations, so certain scripts. We now know if there's unused fields, unused records. If a certain script is running for a longer time, this solution allows us to be able to have these metrics. What other benefits did we see? Integrated change management process. Now, before we would create our forms, our custom forms, document our deployments, all in a spreadsheet, in a file, and then give it to somebody. That's all done for us within the system itself. So, and it allows us to identify compliant and non-compliant changes and deployments. It allows us to determine impact analysis of proposed changes. So for example, if I'm moving something to quality and that specific field has a lot of dependencies, is referred to in a lot of scripts, or is associated to some of the forms and access control, then the solution will tell us, hey, put more focus on this specific deployment, because the chances and risk of invalidating a given or causing issues and requiring regression testing there's a higher risk right now. It has change management approval routing and also built-in issue management. So for example, if there's the release manager accumulates the changes, and when all the testing in a given environment in the Q environment is complete, they could approve the next changes and then actually move changes over. And finally, environment comparison, a really powerful tool. We've leveraged this tool a few times during our rescue projects where change management was not considered early on, and the implementation or the environments became they lost control over the environments. So there was no more gold standard when it came to the latest and greatest environments. So we basically leveraged the environment comparison tool to compare developments to QA, to UAT, to production, to basically resolve and bring the environment to a usable state. So it basically allows us to compare various environments and get a report from this. There's additional tools as well that's as a result of having this documentation or the real state, the current state or the real-time configuration being documented and understanding the dependencies. There's tools like script management and account cleanup tools, which really allow us to understand which scripts are running longer. It allows us to optimize and really get the required logging to optimize some of the automations. And since we know dependencies, it also allows us to clean up the environment in an easier fashion. So for example, there's in the development environment, there's a lot of proof of concepts going on. The cleanup tool allows us to now perform cleanup exercises if required. And finally, my closing remarks with respect to the experience of using the tool. So calculating ROI, and I've noticed this many times on some of my previous implementations, calculating the ROI of Strongpoint is fairly difficult to quantify. The reason why is because of the fact that there's hard and soft costs when it comes to this type of or acquiring a new technology. What hard costs are basically all upfront costs of the Strongpoint software license, whether it's Strongpoint or other solutions. It's really what you have to pay up front to have the tool and be able to leverage the functionality. Soft cost is basically, well, if you don't have that tool, then there's additional effort required by your staff, your consultants, your team, to be able to deploy documents, debug, and resolve issues. So as a result of not having the tool, a lot of things are more manual, and therefore they'll take more time, and there's going to be more issues and more problems, and it's going to be harder to deploy and harder to validate. And so from my experience, soft costs are always significantly outweighs the hard costs, with no exception. Furthermore, Strongpoint also enables the delivery team to focus on their deliverables, which is important. When you have your functional and technical team spending 50% of the time deploying and resolving deployment issues as a result of a missed field, well, they're not really spending time on the actual development efforts that they were hired to do. So there's typically an inefficiency component to Strongpoint that is very important. The research and discovery of problems, outages, that's all done automatically now. So as a result of having the environment comparison tool, we know exactly, or we could quickly know what was missed with respect to deployment, or know exactly who did a certain change if they bypassed the process. It instills confidence in whether it's in the consultants, in the release manager, or the managers themselves. There's a more confidence because everything is backed up in an automated fashion and validated in an automatic fashion for us. So there's a bigger confidence, and especially when it comes to deployment. It proactively avoids disruption, especially, for example, when we're live already and in a steady state. You don't necessarily want any changes to cause your production environment to go down. Strongpoint allows us to know, okay, well, what is the risk of this going change? Is it high? Is it low? Should we actually make this change? And finally, it assures a smoother go live. Typically what we've seen is with the adoption of any change management tool is better than not having it, and therefore we've seen a smoother go live. And finally, the adoption of change management process should always be done early, always at the beginning of the implementation. Perfect. So finally, I'll go into the Q&A. If there's any questions, feel free to write your questions in the webinar's chat box.
Hey, Victor. Doesn't look like we've got any questions right now. So if anyone wants to either raise their hand, I can unmute their microphone, or just, again, post the questions in the chat box. Well, it looks like we've answered every question. So what we'll do is we'll follow up. Everyone who registered or attended the webinar, we will send out a link to the recording of this session so you can review it at your leisure. And thanks very much, Victor, for your time today and for that the content about how you've evolved your adoption of Strongpoint over time with your methodology. Very much appreciate it. Oh, James asked a question about, did the team from FlowDocs come over? Yes, so Strongpoint is FlowDocs. We just changed the name of the company, so it's the entire same team. And James also asked if we can be available for replay. We will be circulating a link to the video so that you can circulate with your team members. Okay, well, thanks everybody. Is Mark still with the company? Yes, he is, James. Mark is still the president and CEO of Strongpoint. And that's Mark Walker for those who are interested. Okay, great. Any final comments, Victor?
No, I don't think so. I'd like to thank everybody for listening in, and have a great day.
That's great. Okay, thanks everybody. And you'll send the recording out later today or first thing tomorrow. Thanks very much.